All right, I'm ready. Hi, everybody. Good morning and welcome to another fabulous journey through the steps with Mike and Holly. I'm Holly. I'm an alcoholic from Jacksonville, Florida. My sobriety date, September 28, 1996. I am super, super excited about the lineup today. Like super excited. I can't wait to hear from everyone today. Start the morning off with the set aside prayer to kick us off with this day of learning and adventure. So if we could just take a breath in and a breath out. Dear God, please set aside everything I think I know about myself, about this book, about my disease, about these 12 steps, and especially about you, dear God, so that I might have an open mind and a new experience with all these things. Please help me to see the truth. Amen.
Amen.
I am very, very excited this morning to announce our first speaker. I want to tell you that I had probably the best steak I have ever had in my life when I had the privilege of being in Staten Island and hosted by his amazing wife, Cheryl and Tommy. They just were absolutely amazing people. I got to be in their household. I got to sit in their living room. I got to see them interact with sponsees coming in the door and kids running around, and I watched the program in action. I'm very, very excited to hear Tommy talk about steps 1 through 3. Without further ado, take it away, Tommy.
Thank you, Holly. Thanks, everybody. Mike. My name is Tom Taracco, and I am an alcoholic from Staten Island, New York, and I'm really grateful to be here. You know, the sober life's got us very busy. We have 4 kids, we have 2 grandkids, we have 3 dogs, and they don't get along, and it's just a very busy household. So to retreat into the basement where you have me right now and to spend a couple of hours with my peeps, you folks, is what it's all about for me. And it's what has given me the life that I've had for these last 25 years. And it's a life that I thought would never exist for a guy like me. And if there's anyone new in the room, please just try to identify with things that you can identify with and don't be too harsh on yourself for where you're at right now. This is a journey and it's not a destination. And the big book is not the treasure. The big book is the map. It gets us to this life, and it's guaranteed if we do what that book says. And for anybody else, and for Susie, oh my God, I was 3 when you got sober. Oh my God. And that is just awesome. And Susie, for you, I just hope that you get out of my talk that, hey, that guy Tom up in Staten Island really loves Alcoholics Anonymous and really owes his life to Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's all I could do. I used to get very, very nervous before speaking anywhere. Zoom is a very unique experience, but I would get nervous, and then at some point in my sobriety, it just changed. I'm not nervous. I'm excited. And I want to be a good spokesperson for AA because of all the things this program has done for me. I don't want to let the fellowship down ever. And I have more passion for this program now, 25 years sober, than I did when I first went through the 12 steps after being abstinent in our fellowship for 18 months. So today I get the privilege of talking about the first 3 steps, or like we like to call it, is our problem, our solution, and our decision, right? Steps 1, 2, and 3. And you know, step 1 for me, I could honestly say step 1 for me lasted 36 years. I mean, you know, I was very slow going through the first step, right? Because first I believe I had all the alcoholic tendencies before I ever picked up that first drink. I was always on edge. I was always filled with anxiety. Fear shows up in this alcoholic as a tightness of chest. I had that before I ever picked up a drink. I came from an alcoholic home. I hid those things from my friends at a young age. I didn't ever want to have kids over the house because of feeling different. So I grew up feeling different, and that continually came through my whole life. Just not feeling a part of. There was a disconnect there. I didn't identify it as a disconnect, but something was wrong. Something was amiss. Even when things were going good, I was the kid that was worried something bad was going to happen. I couldn't even enjoy good times in our home because I knew there would be another debacle behind one of Dad's drinking episodes coming up. It was temporary. When I found alcohol at 11 years old, oh man, it was like walking through the poppy fields in The Wizard of Oz. Everything went from black and white to Technicolor, you know, and I'll date myself a little bit. It was like 1970, and two kids had said, "Hey, Tom, we're going to get some beers tonight. You want to join us?" I'm 11. I said, "Sure." What I'm saying yes to, I just desperately need approval and friends. And they said, "Well, we need some money." I said, "I got that covered." And I went and I started ransacking the coats in the closet. Everybody was pretty trusting back there. My sister or I weren't full blown yet, so they weren't hiding money at that point. So it was easy to get $3 for 3 quarts of Miller beer is what we were going to get. And Staten Island here it's a big, small town. You know, it's a trusting town. You could go to the local supermarket, and we forged a note from my mother, Millie, and said, "Please let Tom buy a pack of Marlboros and 3 quarts of Miller beer." And I walked in, maybe 5'0", with this note. And as we were walking down there, we had this one old guy. Well, at that time he was 40. He was the junkie in the neighborhood, Glenn, you know. And people weren't doing that out in the open back in 1970 here on Staten Island. But he was the guy that would just be nodding out, and he was breaking into houses. He was doing all the wrong things. And he said, "Where you guys going?" And we said, "We're going to get beers." He said, "Drink them warm and through a straw. You'll get messed up quicker." Right? So, I mean, back then we followed directions, right? I mean, 25 years later, I come into AA and somebody tells me, "Hey, get a home group, do the 12 steps, get a sponsor." I'm like, no, I got this. But that junkie on the corner gives me some drinking advice. I'm taking it. You know, that's going to be my mentor. So we did that. We got these warm quarts of beer, and we went behind a Pathmark supermarket in Staten Island. We lit a little fire in the woods because that's what we used to do as kids. I had a boom box, that big radio back then, and it had an 8-track player in it, for those of you old enough to remember 8-track players. And the big record that year was Neil Young, Harvest, and the song was "The Needle and the Damage Done." And we started sipping our beers through the straw, and it was just a grand time, singing at the top of our lungs, very poorly, to some good old music. And I got about halfway through my quart. The straw came out. I started guzzling, and I felt nice. I did not care about the beating I knew I was going to take when I got home. It seemed like all my fears left me. I felt a little taller. I felt a little better looking. I definitely felt strong. I mean, I always put the beer muscles on. I'm a tough guy when I'm drunk. Kind of a big sissy when I'm not, but that's just the way alcohol affects me. I can dance with the girls. I can fight with the guys. And, but the same thing that has happened to me almost every time I pick up a drink is I can't stop. So my friends were putting their caps on their beers, and they're hiding their beers in the woods. And I said, "What are you guys doing?" And they said, "Tom, tonight's Friday, tomorrow's Saturday. We've got to have some for tomorrow." I said, "I'll steal more money." I push one guy down. I take his beer and I drink that down. I made a little bit of a tactical error there. I went after the small guy first, and then by the time I went after the bigger guy to grab his beer, he threw me a beating. I woke up at like 2 a.m. I had a cut lip. I had a cigarette burn on me. I'm covered in vomit. I'm supposed to be home at like 9:30, so this is a problem. My radio's missing. I don't know really where I am, and I was a total blackout drinker the first time. And, that could really just shorten down the whole first step talk. That's how I drank for the next 23 years. I don't think I've ever stopped drinking. I pass out. I have a phenomenon of craving, and an allergy to alcohol that affects me differently than other people, that I just can't stop once I start. And our first step, in the 12 and 12, it says the first step is the step that we need to practice 100%, right? Some in our fellowship will take that to say, well, I don't have to do any of the other steps 100%, or that's a perfect ideal. Nobody can achieve that, all that stuff. I totally get what Bill was saying. Because our singleness of purpose is so important, and admission of alcoholism and understanding what alcoholism is and how it relates to me. not just the textbook college thesis stuff about alcoholism. Many good intending therapists and priests and other folks tried to teach me about alcoholism. But until that bald-headed bookie from Brooklyn sat down with the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous and started relating that book to me, it was all just gibberish to me. But now there it was, laid out in front of me, how I drank. And not being able to stop, not being able to control how long I stop for. I can stop drinking. I just can't control how long I'm going to stop for. And that restless, irritable, and disconnected feeling that I've always felt will come back, and it will overwhelm me, and I will need a drink. And I don't know how long I can white-knuckle that and stay away from it. But, it is so critical that we get a firm first step here, because else would I go through the rest of these proposals and our suggested program of recovery unless I knew there was no other way out. I'm a guy that'll take every shortcut in the world. I will do half measures in my entire life up until meeting you folks. Half measures availed me, I thought, half. It didn't really work that way, but that's what I thought. I would kid myself to that effect. But that phenomenon of craving was there. The blackouts were there the very first time I drank, and they followed me my entire life and 23 years of drinking pretty continuously. And although I was not an everyday drinker for all of those 23 years, I was an everyday thinker. If I wasn't drinking, if I wasn't partying, I was thinking about the next time, or I was covering up my lies and my debacle from the last time. It's just the way it went for me. And it is just amazing to me in hindsight to look back and see that I did not see how I was destroying myself and destroying everybody around me. Fist fights, arrests, broken relationships, putting a child up for adoption, never to see again, running out on a woman who was 8 months pregnant and not seeing that boy for 7 years. And how does this alcoholic deal with those things? I drink more because I can't believe what I'm doing as I'm drinking. And I can't stop. Many a nights I cried, that I couldn't stop. I would be sitting, and if you're a little older, you remember the flag used to come up on the television at about 5 o'clock in the morning, and it would start the new day. And then you'd get Davy and Goliath on certain days, and I'd be sitting there with a bottle of Jack Daniels just crying, oh my God, I did this again. I got to go to work. I'm not going to go to work. I'm too much of a coward to call into work. So thus another jackpot. And it went on for me for a very long time that way. And it's a tough life. It's a tough life. I laugh sometimes when sponsees tell me, this is a lot of stuff to do. Oh, yeah. A few meetings a week, some inventory at night, and prayer and meditation. That's brutal. Go do a couple of weeks in the Brooklyn House of Detention. That's a rough deal. This is not a rough deal. For the effort that we put in here, the benefits are 200-fold. Right? If you drank like I drank and lived like I lived when I was active, that's a full-time gig. That's a full-time gig. Just trying to remember the lies I told the night before, the day before. Who did I hurt? Who did I have to avoid? That's brutal. That is just brutal. And I did that for a long time. And, when I sat down, I always talk about any step I'm asked to speak on. I talk about what that first step or whatever step meant to me in 1997, 18 months away from alcohol, and what it kind of means to me now. Back then, it was transformational. Eye-awakening, filled me with hope. I had a great first step experience because it was the first thing 18 months into this fellowship that I did for myself. Nobody was forcing me to do it. I had lost the job that I came in for that I was trying to manipulate and keep it. I did not have any work, so I wasn't focused on money. Of course, if you're not working, I'm not looking for girlfriends. I'm just hanging on. But boy, every time when I'd go to George's house to read that book twice a week, I filled up with hope. And George was nailing me, page after page after page. Tom, do you drink essentially because of the effect you like produced by alcohol? Of course, I hated the taste of alcohol the first few times. I never really liked the taste. I acquired a taste for alcohol. But God, I loved what it did to me. And it never failed me. I drank it. I got drunk. Never failed. I never had a bad bottle of booze. It was dependable. It got me where I wanted to go, and it got me there quickly. Of course, later on, other things came into play, but that's for a different talk. No, but alcohol always did for me what I could not do for myself. And I didn't understand why I couldn't stop. I knew the unrest I felt, the discontent I felt. When George started to talk about the mental inconsistencies in the big book, and he started to say, Tom, did you suffer mental blank spots? Did you ever say, Tom, you're not going to drink during the day, and then find yourself pounding on the bar saying, how did I get started again? Or I'll only have 2 or 3. Oh, my God, my life was filled with that excuse. We used to kid around once I made it to the bar. I don't know, the car's got some GPS or something, just takes me to the bar. I don't know. I was going home, and then I'd never make it home. I'd never make it home to that wife. I'd never make it home to that girlfriend. I'd never make it to my responsibilities. And that just continued to happen over and over. So therefore, I started to think I was crazy. I was weak-willed. I had so many arguments going on in my head. I had a sponsee just a couple of months ago say, Tom, you don't understand. I have a voice in my head. I said, only one? Are you kidding me? I was like 5 years sober that jumps in my head the minute my head comes off the pillow in the morning. Stop. We got prayers and meditation for that. We'll get there, And he just looked at me like I was bizarre, the way that I looked at George. But George took the time to read this book, to personalize this book to me. And it was just an amazing, amazing experience. When we started to talk about the fact that I cannot control, I don't have the power, control, or choice in a drink, he really put it home to me. And we talked about the man with no legs, who has no power, control, or choice. If that doorbell rings, that man doesn't have the power to get up and answer it. And I don't have the power to stop drinking. I don't have the power to control drinking. I could never control and enjoy drinking. If I'm controlling my drinking, I'm not enjoying it. And if I'm enjoying my drinking, I'm not controlling it, right? It's just the way it goes. And I had a 5-year experience drinking that George pointed out to me that was just about that, trying to control my drinking. From 1990 to 1995 was the worst 5 years of my drinking because I knew I had a problem. And I would try to control my actions and the amounts I drank or where I drank and what I did, and it was just horrible. If you're a guy like me, either open the bottle, throw the cap out, let's bang this down and get some more and do what we have to do, or don't even give me a drink. I'd rather white knuckle it with nothing in my system. And those 5 years looked something like this. I was 30 years old at that point. I'm already drinking in an old man's bar. The guys are like 60, 65 up there, my age now, right? It's called the Armory Inn. It's right up the street from the apartment that I had. I would walk up there so I wouldn't get my 4th DWI. I would go in there and I'd order a Jack Daniels and a short beer. I'd sit in my stool because we all had stools. Not many people came into that bar. And I'd start to pound down a couple of drinks with the old guys. And, if a young lady came in, well, not even a young lady. If any lady came into that bar, it was a pretty seedy place. I'm your guy. Listen, what's the matter? What's the problem? You need directions? You need a ride somewhere? It was fairly easy when my competitors were 35 years older than I was. So, and some nights it would work out very nicely. We'd leave the bar. We'd have a romantic evening. I would wake up. I would remember the young lady's name or the lady's name. I would take her to breakfast. I would get her phone number, and I would drop her off. No consequences. It was great. But then the mental obsession of the alcoholic would start, and it would start pounding on me. You're not that bad. You see, you made more of a bigger deal than this is. Don't worry about it. You can go back out Saturday night. And I would go out Saturday night. I'd sit in that same stool, order that same Jack Daniels and that same beer. But no woman would come into the bar. So at about 2:00, when they would close that place, I would start to go out to what Bill refers to in his story, the most sordid places on earth, looking for female company and other things. And I'd wake up. It'd be Tuesday. I have a transvestite next to me in the bed. I have absolutely no money. I do not know where I am. The drug dealer's got the car. And I reach my hand in my pocket, and I find some dollars crumpled up. I pull them out. They're not singles. there are 4 or 5 ATM slips. I wiped out the bank account as well. And I don't remember any of this. And that's how 5 years of my life went. It was torture. It was mental torture. And then the last night I just went out for a couple with the guys, and I ended up with a 21-year-old cop's foot on my face in the middle of the street, my 4th DWI. I had a handgun in the car. I had a lot of non-approved materials in the car and driving drunk again. And he said to me, if you move, I'm going to blow your effing brains out. And I looked at him and I had a tear in my eyes. And I said, you'd be doing me a favor. Because like it says in the big book, I would build up a good future for myself and my family, and I would tear it down on my head with a bunch of useless sprees. And when George read that line to me, now I had read the big book by myself in those first 18 months, probably 50 times, because the old timers would say, hey, you can't sleep. Nobody ever died from insomnia. Read the literature, right? I would read it. I'd read right over that stuff. It didn't mean anything to me. But reading it with a sponsor, personalizing that book. Did this happen to Tom? Does Tom drink like that? Did this happen to Tom? Underlining things, changing little things and turning them into questions, statements into questions. Boy, that book came alive to me. And then I realized I'm an alcoholic. And when we talked about the spiritual malady, oh my God, now you're explaining my first 11 years of my life and that feeling of disconnectedness I've always had. You know, Carl Jung said in a letter to Bill much later on, I think it was in the 60s, that he said he always thought that alcoholism was fueled by a thirst for God, a disconnect from God. And we don't know that when we're out there. I didn't know that until many, many years in Alcoholics Anonymous. But that's the missing piece. That's that missing piece. That's why it's so important to have that first step. Your experience, not what somebody tells you, not what some book tells you, but you relating your experience to those first 51 pages in the big book. There's a solution. More about alcoholism. Bill's story, identifying with that. The doctor's opinion. It's critical because you're not going to get beyond step 3 if you don't have that firmly in place. And for me, going into a step 2 discussion with my sponsor was paralyzing me in fear. But what drove me to continue? The absolute certainty that I could not stop on my own and stay stopped. He had hammered that home in me over those first month. We spent a lot of time on the first step. We probably spent 8 or 9 sessions, hour and a half at a clip. And back then, he used to give me a cassette tape that would reinforce what we read. And it was a Joe Hawk tape, an alcoholic from California, who did a great step study in the Salvation Army. I think it was called the Hawk's Nest, they called it. And it was just great because I kind of became one of those obnoxious big book guys right off the bat. You know, the guy that's quoting the book. He's out of his mind totally, but can quote the book like crazy. And I would actually read things before going to home group so I could sound very spiritual, but I was still out of my mind. First step doesn't get me out of it. I'm still living in the problem. But then George explained to me, step 2 is our solution. And it's really our only solution. If you self-identify as an alcoholic, one that suffers from alcoholism, you know, I very rarely criticize our founders, but I think they watered down our traditions when they said it was an honest desire to stop drinking. I didn't have a desire to stop drinking when I came in here, but I did suffer from alcoholism, as it says in the long form of the tradition. I suffered from it. And that suffering will open this alcoholic's heart to maybe think that God could help me. I didn't have a concept of God going into step 2. I didn't have a belief in God going into step 2. Actually, I was filled with agnosticism. I don't think I was ever an atheist. I was raised in a Catholic household, but I'm the Catholic that gets dressed up to go to church, and my parents give me the money for the basket, and I go buy cigarettes with that money. So, and then I pick palms up off the ground to show them I went to, and I find out who did the mass so I can tell all the lies. And I did that as a very young kid, you know. I would sit in a bar and I would argue about religion with you, and I didn't know the difference between spirituality and religion, and, you know, I would just rip apart religious folks and their beliefs and for being silly and all the hypocrisy of the human beings that practice it. I was that guy. I remember when I did read the big book on my own, there's a paragraph in We the Agnostic that talks about the preachings of Christ and all this. He was a fine man and his moral standing was good and this and that. But I always felt I never lived up to it. I admitted they were good. And I wrote next to that paragraph, this is me. That's where my agnosticism was going through step 2. But then we get to that question, the second step question that was really posed to me, was, Tom, do you now believe, or are you willing to believe that there's a power greater than yourself? My sponsor was very sarcastic. My sponsor was very rough around the edges. Like I said, he was a bald-headed bookie from Brooklyn, covered in tattoos. He had just had an experience with these 12 steps, and the old guy was on fire. But he didn't give me much wiggle room. He said, willingness, Tom, willing. Or do we want to go back to living the life that you led in those first 51 pages that we went through? All the horrors that you've explained to me, all the mental inconsistencies that you've had, that hole in your chest. Do you want to try to live your life with that hole in your chest the rest of your life? And I said, no, George, but I don't think I can believe in a power greater than myself. Then he said, so you think you're it? You think you're it? The sun rises and sets in the crack of your butt, Tom? Is that what you're telling me? And this alcoholic had to talk to me in the state that I was in to make it sink in. No, although a mess, a conceited mess, a vain, a prideful man, I knew I wasn't all powerful. And I saw distinctly in my first step experience that my life was hardly a success. You couldn't even come close to saying it was a success. When I was new in Alcoholics Anonymous, walking down the street or walking to a meeting because I was living on my mother's couch with no driver's license, no money, and no job, real prize package at 35. If a car backfired here on Staten Island, I jumped over hedges because I thought somebody was taking a shot at me. That's where my life gets me, run on my will. So the willingness, I think Bill Wilson just had such divine inspired genius writing this book because he didn't make it absolute where a guy like me could say, no, I don't believe. And you know what? I would still be in step 2 at that question 25 years later because I would have never gotten past that and taken the actions in these other 12 steps that have made a belief in God and a power greater than myself unshakable in this alcoholic now. I would have been stuck on step 2. But I was willing to believe. And George also said, are you willing to believe that I believe? And I said, oh, no, George, I have no doubts you believe, but I think you're a little whacked out. That was my answer. Because George just had that, new guy through the steps glow about him and, everything's great. Isn't Alcoholics a great fellowship? And, no, it's really not. It's filled with a bunch of dopes, George, and I hate the home group, and I'm not even really liking you right now. But George was just centered, and he had something that was so attractive that I listened to this guy. And more so, he told me, I will not tell you anything to do. We're going to let the book guide us. That's the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't have a program, he said. They have one, and it works very well for a lot of people that came well before us. And when he put it those ways, it was very easy for me. It was not, the steps were not a difficult process. I love when people said, oh, I'm going through the work. No, you're not. No, you're not. The steps aren't the work. The 12 steps, the work. You're going through a transformational program of recovery that will save and transform your life and definitely rid you from the thoughts and the obsession of alcoholism. The work will come is when you have a great life delivered to you by your higher power and this program, and you come home from a 12-hour day of work, and there's that mopey, long-winded sponsee sitting on your steps, and it's time to work with them, and all you want to do is grab something to eat and go to sleep. The work comes at 2 o'clock in the morning when somebody calls you and you got to go out and talk to somebody who's struggling with alcoholism. The work is going to your detox commitment on Super Bowl Sunday when the whole family's in the house. These steps are not the work, folks. It might be laborious if we fight them, but it doesn't have to be. It wasn't for me. That was not my experience with these 12 steps. I grabbed onto this like a man on a flimsy reed, like our book tells us. This was an exciting time in my recovery because I didn't have much recovery coming up to this. So we talked about God in many different ways, and George broke down my agnosticism and he broke down my prejudice, which is key. I had so many prejudices against so many things about so many religions, basically because I didn't feel that I could ever live up to any of them, and I didn't think I was good enough to be accepted by a God. George made me circle a few words in step 2 with We the Agnostics. I think it was like on page 48 or so. I might be missing the page, but it said, this power in your life will be so evident, you will see, feel, direct, and use it. He had me circle those things. He said, we'll come back to that in another time in the steps. And we did. I think around the 11th step, I was well into the amends at that point. And he said, do you see, feel, direct, and use God in your life on a daily basis? And I could tell you 25 years later, when I am practicing these principles and I am spiritually fit, I have not been that way for 23 years. I can tell you that right now. But when I am, I see, feel, direct, and use God on a daily basis in my life. And my family life and my work life and my AA life show that. See, feel, direct, and use. A power that I never had. A power that I got out of a bottle and other substances for many, many years. This is a great way of life. And we're only scratching the surface when we answer that question. You know, there's a second question in step 2 that's a little tricky, and I don't know that we understand it when we're going through those 12 steps that first time. And I don't know, although we might intellectually understand it sometime down the road, it says, God is either everything or he is nothing. What's your choice to be? Now, my answer went something like in 1997, well, God better be everything, because up to this point, I've been nothing. And that, for George, was enough for us to keep moving. But I can tell you, like I said, you know, what's that step mean to you when you're first coming around or first doing the steps, and what's it mean to you 25 years? So God is either everything or is he nothing to me now. Really? Are you practicing that, Tom? Are you living that way? Is God your money? Is God your kids? Or are you their God? Right? Am I trying to control the actions of my families and people at work? Or do I give that to God? A friend of mine, Harold Long, very spiritual guy from Missouri. I was all jammed up about my son and him doing heroin and things like this, and I was really out of my mind. And I went to a men's retreat, and everybody saw I was out of sorts. And him and a guy, Bob B., sat me down, and they were talking to me, and they said, you know, you should probably do some inventory on this because you're really out of whack, which I did. I shared that inventory with them. And then Harold said this most simple thing to me that has made us, and this was about 8 years ago. It has had a profound effect on the way that I parent my children and the family man that I am. And he said, Tom, you're not Brett's God. Cheryl's not your wife. God has put you in charge of the spiritual lives of these people and to care for them. But they're his kids. And man, just something that simple, so obvious, right, to a bunch of AAs talking about God and things on a Friday morning. But I was not looking at it that way. And it needed to shift my perception. And that's exactly what it did. I'm forever grateful for him for saying that to me. Because I don't look at my family as possessions or people that have to live up to my expectations. Expectations that I don't live up to all the time myself, right? But he really set me straight on that. And that's basic step 2 stuff for me 25 years down the road. Am I giving all my problems to God, or am I just giving my alcoholism to God, but I can manage my relationships? I'll manage my sponsees. I'll manage my AA relationships. I'll manage my money. Or is it all about God? For me, I'm all in right now. Right now, as I sit here talking to you, I'm all in. I have been a failure in managing all of those areas at different times in my life. And it's been abundantly clear to me that in this alcoholic's life, it's not just my alcoholism that was relieved by a higher power, but God helps me to be a better man each and every day because I ask him to help me in my morning prayers each and every day. Help me to be a better father. Help me to be a better son. Help me to be a better husband. Take me out of the equation, God. Let me be a service. And if we ask, he will be there. He has never let me down. My self-will come in and throw a monkey wrench in things now and then, but that's acceptable. You know, God has given us the ability to have free will, and we've done that. But step 2 was a profound experience for me with George, because I went from a place of never, I am not going to give myself up to a higher power because that is weak. Look at the hypocrisy of this. I was so shut down to it. And if I was an eggshell, there was just a crack. And that little light started to shine. And I felt it right away. I felt something shift in step 2. It wasn't a lot. And you know, I don't know, maybe many of us have had this experience. I don't see things when I'm going through them. My whole recovery, the last 24 years, has been in hindsight. I don't know what's happened to me, when it's happening, but 6 months later, I'll tell you exactly what's happening, right? Like when I lost my job, 18 months sober, I did not see, oh, this is a disaster, this is horrible. I was actually crying in a men's meeting, you know, oh, I lost my job. The old timers, right, in AA, they're the best. Like, hey, Tom, there's 3 billion people in China. None of them work for the Department of Ed. You're going to be just fine. Stay with us. And they make like no big deal out of it. Meanwhile, my whole life's falling down. But 6 months from that fact, I knew I was too headstrong on money, manipulating the outcome of my to that job. So God removed it. And he took care of me. He provided me side work to pay my bills for the 6 months that it took me to go through these 12 steps. And all of a sudden, the material stuff was removed from my life so I could focus on my program of recovery. Clear as bell, that's what God did for me back then. But I didn't see it as that. I was too wrapped up in old poor me. I did not see it as God working in my life, but I see it clearly now. And that's how a lot of these little God shots are. But I did feel that shift in step 2. Which was just an amazing thing. You know, we go on and we can talk a little bit about step 3. And I was just checking time. So we come out of step 2, and George says to me, "Do you have a problem praying, Tom?" I said, "No, George, you know, I asked you for some guidance on that. I'm a guy that was so far removed. You know, I had George write the Hail Mary down for me because I knew no prayers. George wrote the Our Father on a cue card for me so I could bring it with me to this little spot we have on Staten Island and read it. And I used to go back to George and say, George, nobody's on the other end of these prayers. He said, Tom, you don't know that. Be willing to think that there is. That's all. And just continue to do the practice. And I kept reading those prayers and feeling like they were empty and nothing was happening. There was no spiritual connection in me. But I had a connection with George. And I trusted George. And I began to start really trusting the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And the things that you folks were saying in meetings started to make some sense to me. I realized that when I just focused on what I could change, right, our serenity prayer, what I could change and leave everything else alone, things started to make sense to me and started to get easier. Life started to get slightly easier for me. You know, the old saying, they say, well, you know, in an AA meeting, if you come in and you put all your problems in one basket and you put your alcoholism in another basket, just focus on the alcoholism and the other problems go away. Well, those corny statements, which I wanted to punch old timers in the face when they said them and I was going through something, they really started to show that this is true. They were not just trying to be sarcastic with me. They were not just picking me out of the crowd and saying, you're an idiot, stop whining. They were giving me active spiritual advice, and I didn't see it. But But that started to happen as we go from step 2 to step 3. And George said, Tom, are you going to have a problem kneeling down on the ground and holding my hands and saying a prayer? And I said, no, George, because I know your answer to that. And he said, what do you mean? I agreed to be willing to go to any lengths. And if that means kneeling down and holding hands, I guess that's your version of any lengths. This was the relationship I had with this guy. It was not, that's why I'm saying the steps for me that first time, it was a great experience. You know, he used to cook dinner every night when we do the steps. And he was an Italian guy, and I told you the bookie, he was a good cook. You know, he came up in the bars. He knew his way around the kitchen. We had a great time going through these 12 steps. And we started to read, you know, how it works and going through those chapters, and everything started to make sense. Those shades that I looked at in fear for my first 18 months, looking up at them. Oh my God, look at this. God. Oh my God. I'm not writing inventory. I'm not sharing that inventory. Oh God. You know, like, oh, what's with all the God stuff here? That's what I would look at those shades for. But now when we read it and how it works, it started to make a little sense. The chapter's term, how it works, it didn't explain to me how it works, right? I could still debate that with you now. How does it work? But it laid it all out pretty clear what I was going to have to do. And I got really afraid because, like I said, my lifestyle was just about hurting people, breaking hearts, breaking relationships, getting in trouble, lying, cheating, and stealing. And like any good alcoholic, I'll go 6 steps forward, and I'm thinking I'm in 9, and I'm not doing that, right? Or I'm in 4, and I'm not doing that. And George just said, stay with me here in step 3. And we started to read about step 3. And some magic happened in step 3. Again, like hindsight, right? When I got done with step 3, I had absolutely no problem writing an inventory and sharing that inventory. And that was not there in step 2. I was not willing to do that in step 2. But we went through step 3, and we came up to those what I would call them, the ABCs, right? With that we have to acknowledge at this point that we were alcoholic and could not lives, right? Probably no human power could remove our alcoholism. This was made clear to me in step 1. And then in step 2, I was willing to believe that God could and would if he was sought. But I did understand that it's my job to seek him. And that's where the cue cards with the prayers came, and the quiet time, which for a newcomer, for me, with 18 months, was not quiet time. That was just time with my voices. I can't shut that down. But I had a lot of very patient AAs with me that taught me about prayer and meditation in relations to the 3rd step, not the 11th, that just told me, breathe. Imagine yourself at the bottom of a stream and the water's going over you. And when those thoughts come through, let that leaf go past you. It was very simple AA advice that made these things very easy for me and very comfortable for me. And I started to feel like from the outskirts, I was starting to join the herd. And I really started to become safe and protected, even before the rest of those 12 steps. We're talking about the beginning of step 3, and I'm already starting to feel safe and protected. And I'm not thinking about drinking. And that I don't realize yet, but that's the miracle of this, isn't it? I mean, Alcoholics Anonymous is one of the greatest baits and switches, I think, out there. You know, it's like a carnival game where the guy calls you in and then they sell you something else or whatever. Because I came in here just to stop drinking. I really thought my life was unmanageable because of the way I drank. And then you flip that on its butt. And then, there are many times in the reading, the 3rd step is one, where Bill kind of throws you another little curve. After you say the 3rd step, now you've just given your life to God. Bill says, we think well before we've taken this step. Wait a minute. You didn't tell me that before I took this step. You're just telling me that after this step. It's like this constant spiritual bait and switch. But it's divinely inspired for folks like us who might give any opportunity to walk away from it and balk. There's no reason to balk in step 3. You are not going to be in step 3 and say, okay, at this moment, here's my will. And it's going to be that cut and dry. Not my experience. You know, when we hear people say, I give my will back, I take it, whatever. However you want to look at it, it's not that cut and dry. What still has to remain is the willingness. So back then, we talked about those requirements, and he said, and he told me about the first edition that said, you know, if you're not convinced about this, you could throw this book away. Reread this book up to this point, or throw it away. That was the original language after those ABCs, which a little hardcore might have scared some of us if we were us little sensitive alcoholics in the 1900s, but they were banging them back then, you know. Throw it out. You don't believe us? Throw it out. Go do some more drinking. That'll convince you. Right. But just an amazing thing. But I believed what we were doing. And then there was a little curveball thrown to me in step 3. And we spent a lot of time talking about it. So our first step is that we were powerless over alcohol and our lives had become unmanageable. But here it is. The first requirement in recovery is a life run on self-will could hardly be a success. It's there in writing. It's a big book. It's got to be true. Right? I'm starting to believe in this book that much that this has to be true. So George and I talked a lot about what's your self-will look like, Tom? What does your life run on self-will look like? And oh my God, we went over all those decisions, those things that I did, those people that I hurt. We started to talk about all that stuff. And then we came up to what George told me is the greatest promise in our big book. And he said, so we see that all our problems are of our own making. And I was sitting there and I said, you know, that really doesn't seem too promising, George. I mean, it makes me understand I screwed this up. But he said, well, Tom, if you had to wait for your dad to recover, if you had to wait for your mom to get better, if you had to wait for you to get the job back, you might be sick a very long time. But you've said that you're willing to believe in a higher power now. We're going to be saying a prayer very shortly that is going to get you into an agreement with God. It's the greatest promise in the big book. Because now I can take responsibility for my life, a life centered in God. And I don't have to worry about what you people think of me, what my dad said to me, how they hurt my feelings, how my self-esteem was affected, or any of the things that we learn in the 4th step that our friend Tim is going to talk to us about. But that's a big, big promise. And we talk about that decision based on self that later put us in a position to be hurt. It's just great. It's just great. You could always track back your own resentment to something that you did selfishly. Your life run on self-will. However little, however minute that choice will be, there's always something there if you look hard enough. And if you can't see it yourself, that's when we call our sponsor. But George was really, really clear, and he was a man on fire with a solution for me. And he was able to explain these things that probably would have slid by me in the big book. As they did those 50 times that I read that book by myself. And I had trouble locating the steps in the big book. It was like, would you guys hide these on me? You know, I mean, it's my experience today. I could be reading the 3rd step with a sponsee and see something that jumps out on the page with me that's not highlighted, that's not underlined. Like, where did they put this in? When did this come in? Somebody must be editing my book when I'm not here. It's just the way that book is written for us, about us. And then we got down on our knees, and George said, listen, I'm going to tell you, you'll understand this prayer a little bit more, but we're just going to read it together. And I remember I felt very, very strange kneeling down on a ceramic floor with this tattooed, bald-headed bookie from Brooklyn. And when I held his hands, my hands were so clammy. They were like marriage day clammy. You know, I've been married a couple of times. I know that feeling. They were marriage day clammy. And, you know, but we did it. And I remember I could feel the tremors in my hands as I was shaking. And George felt it too. And what did George do? George just had that goofy little spiritually scented smile that used to drive me insane back then. But it was something I wanted. And we said the 3rd step prayer. And, it was magical. It was a magical, magical experience for us. We stood up. He smiled. He hugged me. We ate some pasta, and we talked more about it. I thought I was leaving, but then he steered us into the next directions that Tim will pick up on. I didn't get any break that night. I didn't have any revelations time that night. We got right back into step 4 after that. But the step 3 experience really drilled home what it did was, so step 2 was my solution from step 1, that horrible life lived on self-will that I lived. Those 51 pages broke me down, made me willing to believe in a higher power, a power greater than myself. And then when we said the 3rd step prayer, I did not realize the deal that I was making with God back then. Oh, I fully realize it now. So step 3 for me back then was very simple. And George put it this way, Tom, it's a contract with God and with me that you're going to just continue these 12 steps. We're going to keep it that simple for now. Can you do that? And I said, yeah, I can. My 3rd step today, 25 years sober, 60 years old with 4 kids and 3 dogs, big job. All the things that you folks have given back to me, means a lot more. I understand my contract with God, and that's to help his kids. And friends like Harold and friends like Bob B and these guys, they hammer that into me. It's not about our knowledge of the big book. It's not about the big book. It's about how I treat you. It's about how I treat my wife. It's about how I treat my kids. Kids that sometimes I don't even think I deserve. Is God everything or is God nothing? How am I living my life today? I'm very happy to tell you today, pretty well. It hasn't always been the case. But Alcoholics Anonymous, the men and women that were here before me, Susie, God bless you for holding those doors open for a drunk like me to come in here. Holly and Mike, I love you guys, for asking me to do this. I know tomorrow, my grandson's first birthday party's tomorrow. So I had off from work today to get the yard ready, and we're going to have, 50, many of which will be alcoholics in the backyard. I wouldn't have any of this without you guys. And, I'm extremely, extremely grateful to be here today because I know that day's going to go smooth. This weekend's going to fly by. It's going to fly by, and I'm going to go to my home group, and I'm going to talk to some sponsees tomorrow, and it's because what you guys have shown me for the last 24 years. It's just a wonderful, wonderful life, and it's all centered around my willingness to be kind, to be loving, to live a transparent life, to clear up mistakes when I make them, and I still make them often. My default position can be a-hole. I'm telling you, it's not all an AA talk. Believe me, talk to my wife. She's my walking 10th step. You could get the real deal if you talk to Cheryl. But I can tell you, God and Alcoholics Anonymous and the men and women that have been here before me give me a chance each and every day. And they tell me that, Tom, don't worry about it. This is how you can clean that up. This is how you can grow from this experience. And, I'm eternally grateful to you folks. And, so that was my 2 hours in a 1 hour New York talk. And, I hope I made up for my tardiness. Tim, you're a much better alcoholic than I am being on time with a shirt and tie. You did very well. How are you? So I'm going to turn that over, but thanks a lot for having me, folks. And I'm going to stay with you for a while. So thank you. Thanks, Holly.
Thank you so much, Tom. Oh my gosh.